In 1971, Bill Withers released these words to a song. Grandma's hands clapped in church on Sunday morning. Grandma's hands played tambourine so well. Grandma's hands used to issue a warning. She'd say, "Billy, don't you run so fast. Might fall on a piece of glass. Might be snakes in the grass." Grandma's hands. There's something about the hands of my grandmothers that I remember so distinctly. I'm lucky to still have my maternal grandmother, who many of you all saw at my installation a couple of years ago. I watched her hands work so hard. She cleaned homes from the age of 12 to her mid-80s, working 8 to 10 hours a day. Strong yet beautiful hands. And then there was my paternal grandmother, who has gone on to glory now, and I clearly remember her hands as ones who was always in the garden, always in the dirt. Her and my papa had acres and fields filled with crops and lush grass. And I would watch as she would take those fresh green beans and snap off the top and divine them and then place them in the bags and put them in the deep freezer. Or in ways that she would take my hands and show me the right way to shuck purple hull peas. I know some of y'all are country enough to know what I'm talking about. But I'll never forget the day that she told me I was old enough to help in the garden. She had all the seed packets laid out on the floor to go in which row in the garden. She took my hand and poured a couple of seeds out to teach me to be delicate with them. They are small, but they will grow something great, she would say. We went outside and my papa was behind the roller tiller getting those beds ready to go, lining them up. And after he finished each row, my grandma would take my hand and pull me down to the ground on my knees. And we would get in the dirt and she would say, "We must make a little baby bed for the seeds." And just like babies, when they are sleeping, we cover them with a blanket. We have to cover our seeds up with dirt. And I watched those hands fold over the dirt, and we did this for the entire day, placing 3 or 4 seeds at a time in their baby beds and covering them, going from one seed packet to the next. And each day I would run out to the garden to check to see if those babies grew any. And day after day, I would go and check, day after day, looking to see if there were any little sprouts just yet. And finally, the crop grew, but also did the weeds. And my eager 5-year-old self went out and began to pick the wrong things. And my grandma gently, in her way, used her hands to teach me what were weeds and what were good growth. I like to think Jesus is just as particular as my grandmother was in planting his garden. Yes, I know Jesus is not actually down on his knees in the dirt sowing seeds, but these stories he is sowing into human beings is just about the same. If we are dust and dirt, and dust shall we return to, Jesus is sowing seeds in us that will reap wisdom and knowledge. Jesus sows many parables to his listeners in chapter 13, the first of which is the parable of the sower. You know which one that is. A sower went out to sow seeds, and some landed on good ground, and others landed on another type of ground, and so on and so on. And in secret, Jesus tells his disciples what the meaning of this parable is, and he says that the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the words and understands them and does the work. The seed for Jesus is stories of the kingdom and how well we grasp its knowledge and adhere to living into it the kingdom rather than evil and sin. Evil, which we'll get to in a bit, plays a large role in this parable. After the parable of the sower, Jesus tells them about the wheat and the weeds. And to be honest, I didn't know much about this parable until last year when I was glancing through the Bible. And that probably sounds bad as a Baptist. I wasn't so familiar with it as many others might have been. Let's go there. The parable is unique to Matthew's gospel. And this time, Jesus tells a story about two sowers, one who sows good seed to grow wheat, and then an enemy who sows weeds among the wheat. Matthew uses the Greek term zizania, which in modern botanical terms refers to a genus of wild rice grass. What Matthew is most likely referring to is darnel or cockle, a noxious weed that closely resembles wheat and is plentiful in Israel. And the difference between darnel and real wheat is evident only when the plants mature and the ears appear. The ears of real wheat are heavy and they will droop over. But the ears of darnel will stand up straight. This is why it's important in the parable to wait to see which is growing, to know which to pick. And then Jesus tells some other parables, the mustard seed, the yeast. And then after that, Jesus is pulled to the side by the disciples, and they are pleading with him, please tell us, what does it mean of the wheat and the weeds? This makes no sense at all. Please share it with us. And Jesus does in secret. And Jesus tells the disciples that the one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. And the field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom, and the weeds are the children of evil. And the enemy came and sowed, and the harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Makes sense, right? We're good to go home. We got it, right? In 1969, comedian Flip Wilson introduced to the world Geraldine, the outspoken fictional wife of a preacher. And she made her debut on Wilson's comedy album, The Devil Made Me Buy This Dress, which also introduced her famous line, The Devil Made Me Do It. Geraldine became a recurring character on the Flip Wilson show, and her catchphrase quickly caught fire in American culture at a time when there were only 3 television channels. Popular shows had a wide reach. A single quote could become common language, and Geraldine's line did exactly that. Before long, people everywhere were using it as a humorous excuse for their own questionable decisions. In the original skit, Geraldine's husband confronts her about a brand new expensive dress. And without missing a beat, she responds, "The devil made me do it." She goes on to describe how the devil followed her down the street, lured her into the dress shop, showered her with compliments, and then forced her to write her husband's name on the check. The phrase became a cultural punchline, an easy way to dodge responsibility. Whenever someone got caught making a poor decision, they could simply blame it on the devil. And after all, if the devil was in control, who or how could they be at fault? This would be so simple and easy if we could just use this as an excuse for blaming anything that goes on. The tempter, the Satan, as called in the Hebrew Bible, the accuser, the diabolic one, or simply translated in this, evil. The parable and talk of evil lends itself to the theodicy discussion. Many of us have been having this discussion for weeks when we just don't know it, probably. It is the philosophical and theological effort to reconcile the existence of evil and suffering in a world with the belief in an all-powerful and all-good God. And before you ask me in the narthex, how did the weeds, rather evil, get on earth? The answer is, I really don't know. And most philosophers and theologians don't have great answers to the question either. It's the question that stays in our minds and wonder, what in the world is God doing up there? God, do you not see this mess of weeds that is interfering with the good crop? Pluck it up. But one of the best explanations that I have read recently comes from Thomas Long and David Bentley Hart. And they say that this is a kind of provisional cosmic dualism. It is a dualism because it recognizes there is evil in the world and that this evil is not divine origin, but it is God's enemy. It is cosmic because it recognizes that evil is a spiritual force. It's not just a result of human error or natural forces and understandable conflict, but is rather a force that transcends human capacities and rational explanation. It is provisional because it rejects the idea that this battle between good and evil was an original feature of creation or an enduring one. Did you notice when the enslaved individuals saw the weeds, they began to wonder what seed packets the master had bought to reap such darnel? Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from? And the master is so quick to give them an answer. No. I am the good one. I am only sowing good seeds in good ground. An enemy came while I was sleeping and planted this. And this verse tells us that God has an enemy, and it is evil. Evil. The senseless act of taking lives. Evil of white supremacy and homophobia and the many phobias that we have. Evil when we watch adults and children are starved and by bombs raged upon them in Gaza. Evil when stripping away a family. Evils that pervade systems and oppress structures. Evil. Evil in the land when there's opportunity to turn from it and to turn away from sin. Evil we see, evil continues happening among us, around us, evil. And as one theologian reminds us, God does not plant evil in the fields of our lives and creation. God does not create evil so that we will have free moral choice. Evil is God's enemy, not God's instrument. Not God's counterpart, and not something about which God is indifferent to. No, we don't have all the answers to the difficult question of why does evil happen or why does God allow it. But what we do know, what Scripture and our experience have taught us, is that God is with us in our pain and our suffering and our hurt, that when we suffer, God suffers too. When we cry, God cries too. And in the face of evil, God calls God's children, the people of goodness and faith, to rise up, to reconcile, and to restore morality and hope in a world often choked by weeds of wickedness. In his book, Becoming Human, Jean Varnier, founder of the L'Arche Communities, recounts a haunting visit to a children's ward in a psychiatric hospital. I once visited a psychiatric hospital that was a kind of warehouse of human misery, he states. Hundreds of children with severe disabilities were lying neglected in their cots. And it was deadly silence. Not one of them was crying, and when they realized that nobody cares, that nobody will answer them, children no longer cry. It takes too much energy. We cry out only when there is hope that someone will hear us. We cry out only when there is hope that someone will hear us. And we ask the questions, God, do you hear us now? God, will you come in our distress? And the gospel's response is yes. Yes, God hears the cries of the suffering, and we may not fully understand where evil comes from or why it continues, but we know this evil is God's mortal enemy, and God comes to do battle not with sword and spear and shield, but with the power of the cross and the unstoppable force of love. And it makes a difference. It's hard to see it. It's hard to realize it. But with God's love, we can restore. We can reconcile to be who God calls us to be as good, faithful soil in the world. Amen.